Okay, the Imperial Governors portion of Imperial Governors and Strategos. And now I probably bumped things and zooming in, and you'll see my shirt if I don't come check. No, of course not, because I checked. Alright, so again, there's two games in the box. They both use almost the same system. The rulebook tries to imply it's the same system. It isn't. There are some significant differences. Yeah. One of the biggest ones is how boats can be used. Boats are very, very effective and interesting in the Strategos scenario. Not so interesting in the Imperial Governors. They become kind of hard to use effectively, which makes Carthage, well, actually a Rome-Carthage war could follow. The patterns, you want to advance with Carthage into Spain, that's where the two are going to meet, and then eventually, if you do end up in Italy and moving around there and handling stuff, and the game actually may handle the Punic War kind of well, except it might not end very ever, which is one of the problems with the system as a whole. As a design, is that you're kind of relying on somebody, I think, to concede the game that they're doing badly enough that they probably can't come back. But, eventually they actually likely will. The game will just continue forever if that's the case. There's nothing in this game that ends it except mutual agreement, unlike Strategos, which actually has victory conditions. Although this one may suggest that you play it with a time limit. Time limits can be really annoying in a game like this, though. Play ends up in a kind of stilted in the sense that one player a player can hoard up their resources and try for a quick grab to get some extra victory points right at the end. I know I've seen that in Empires in the Middle Ages, in the games. Once you get towards the end, the Grand Campaign, it's not such a big deal, although it'll still happen at the end, except that you're so fatigued by the time you get there, if you get there, that you just really don't care anymore about trying to win all that much. Plus, some people might have victory points that can't be taken away, that they put in the bank. That can be a factor with that. With this game, though, it's a fairly simple system. It would very easily be possible to save enough money to give yourself the edge to move from second or third place into first if no one else is trying that same thing. And if everybody's kind of trying that, it still feels kind of fake, You want things to achieve a certain level of finality. What this game does not manage to do is it doesn't manage to create a particularly believable history at all. It doesn't create believable sub-portions in terms of the game itself, and it doesn't tend to create something that feels like the overall broad flow makes sense. The fact that people can run around and keep themselves alive for a long, long time by picking off the cities that you've already conquered, that you really can't afford to garrison everything, so you can't stop that. Things like that. Could those things be fixed? Perhaps, but the question is, how much is it worth it? I would rather put my effort, and tell me I have, but I would rather put my effort into Imperium Romanum to try to figure out how to make that work more in a more fun sort of way. But that's one of the things about this game. The game is kind of fun to play, I think, in a group. I've never played it in a group, not the Imperial Governors portion, but I can see where there's an enjoyment factor to it, and it's not completely broken in terms of a mechanism that just, to me, demolishes the entire play of the game, the way, say, Conquest of the Empire. God, how did that get through Milton Bradley? Usually most of the Game Master Series games, those were pretty solid games at least. This doesn't have that kind of flaw in it, and I'm sure there's a fix for the catapults in Conquest of the Empire. This gives a little bit more flavor and a little bit more story than that does. And to tell you the truth, I think it gives a little bit more flavor and story than Pax Romana does. That may just be my incredible disappointment with that game showing through, but yeah, that ended up feeling so dry to me. And this has, a silliness factor to it that I kind of enjoy, that I think works well. You throw these fake cards in, boy, that's a lot of randomness to put into a game. It can hose you right off the bat, but it also adds a little excitement and fun to it. But I gotta say, there's more randomness to this than there is, say, to Risk. Sure, there's a lot of die rolling in Risk, but the combat table in this, although you're always assured either victory or no effect, sometimes, and this is the same in Strategos, sometimes a victory can come at such a high price that you didn't want that. You would rather have had the no effect than the bad, the 25% losses on the victory chart. And when you throw in these cards, when you throw in the fact that combat is really highly variable, you may or may not be able to continue forward. You try to take something, your chances of taking it might be very low unless you have high odds. Very high odds in the case of trying to take a city or something like that, because the defender is boosted by the strength of the city. And it's the cities that generally are important. Every now and then you can catch an enemy force at good odds, at any odds, and wipe it out. And this affects Strategos as well. That's seldom the case. What's the more usual case is that you're fighting over a defended city, and you've got so-so odds against it, and the enemy has very few troops at risk. If he loses the city, it's not that big a deal, but if you lose like a quarter of your troops, it is a big deal, and it's often hard to get, good enough odds that you have a decent chance of winning the battle and not feeling bad about it afterwards. Terrible attrition. The cost to demobilize units in both cases is so extreme that you never do it in both the games, or almost never. I actually did it in this one. But usually in Strategos it's easier to shift things. In this, sometimes things are so far away you want to demobilize them. But it's much more likely that you just run out of cash and you have to demobilize, and your army just disintegrates on you. Let's take a look at some of the special stuff in here. Like I said, the navies have become weakened because the ports are the only places you can land stuff, move stuff. The income system, like in Strategos, because it is the same base core system, like I said, the main mechanism in this game is counting. You are going to spend more time counting how much income you have, and then counting the units you have on the board and paying them off. They try to suggest, this, hey, keep track of it all on paper. That would work fine on Vassal. I don't trust my or anyone else's ability to keep track of how many units and how many provinces they have all on paper without lots of regular checking. So you'd be doing a lot of counting even if you do that. I trusted the method that I used fairly well, even though I made some mistakes that I caught in the Strategos. I didn't catch them here. The capture of leaders, huge cost if you lose a leader. If you lose a leader in battle, you're going to lose 50% of your income for each leader, unless it's your king, in which case it's 75%. That can cripple you, that can destroy your whole country, and that's one of the ways that you can kind of get ahead here. It makes the king kind of an interesting piece, because is he with your big army, and thus may be at risk, because you're not going to lose him, due to random casualty or anything like that, but you might get outmaneuvered and lose a battle, and then your king's captured and it's a little higher cost. But even at 50% is a big cost, and sometimes you have a couple of leaders stacked together. That could be, 100% of your income if it's two leaders together, 125% if it's your king. You have to pay over multiple turns then. says you must ransom a leader. It doesn't say how many you have to ransom, but there's a rule later once you lose all your provinces or whatever that seems to indicate that you pay over multiple turns. So, whatever. There's a really weird and horrible rule, and this is meant to prevent player elimination, where basically they didn't want player elimination in this, so they let the king wander around and found a new kingdom or whatever. Well, in order to support that, they made rules where you can you can raise any number of troops with your king if you don't have a home country. As long as you don't have your original home country, as far as I can see, you get your income from your home country. So it's kind of a bonus to lose your original home country. Maybe I'm misreading that. I feel like there's a few things where, and there's a lot of ambiguity in these rules, but I think there's a few places where this could be tightened up significantly, and you might end up with a better game. For example, so what if it has player elimination? Eventually Rome conquered the whole area. Let them do that. Pet peeve, the names of the leaders totally don't match, a single period. But that's okay. The story that the game tells probably doesn't match a single period as written. However, if you allow for player elimination, the game might. Balance. It's very, very clear that Egypt is in a horrible position and they don't have an easy way out of it. All the other powers, I think through the diplomacy, can kind of balance out and get something cool. But Egypt becomes kind of a prize for other players, and you would never want to play Egypt, I think. There's this weird client kings rule, which allows a player to kind of stay in the game as a little buddy of another player. The other player gives him territory, and he's never allowed to attack, and therefore he counts towards victory, essentially. And if you have a time limit game, he counts towards the victory points for the player that he's serving. He can conceivably become loose if the other player loses his home country. The randomness of the cards is humongous. You can draw a card in the first turn of the game that prevents you from expanding, and you're going to just be, in a worse position than anyone else. Now, in addition to Egypt's horrible starting position, they had one of those cards early on and some other problems early on. There's a whole set of negotiation rules that are just bullshit, basically. I don't see using them, but they seem to imply that you have to pay money to negotiate with people. I don't see, if it's important for us to negotiate, if we're playing with that rule, you're never going to get more than $1 from me. And I may ask you, give me $1, so which I don't know if that's allowed or not, but it's implied here that you can ask for $1 so that you can give it to someone. If you're in really dire straits, well, if that's the case, can I do it always? What's up here? It's also not stated as you must do this. It's stated kind of like it was traditional to do this, and kind of feels more like a role-playing aspect than anything else. Money's so important in this game. I wouldn't be giving that kind of cash. I wouldn't be giving more than $1, and I would only give that because it's mandatory, So there's not I don't think there's much value to that rule. Overall, it's kind of less well developed than the Strategos game is. There are just such holes in it, there's no victory conditions for the main game, only if you add this optional time limit to it. And there's links in the rules where you go from one game to the other where they say, well, in Strategos it's not at all clear, for example, that that the countermix, whether the countermix is a limit or not. I tend to assume it is if it doesn't say otherwise. But then in the Imperial Governors rules, it clearly is not. It says make your own counters for it. Yeah, great. But, it's a reasonable situation. I found the coins helped a lot, the poker chips, for keeping track of cash instead of writing everything down. Probably mainly because I'm using a camera. I don't mind writing cash down in games, but when I only have my left hand available, my writing is really terrible, so I'd rather not do that. Anyway, overall, I guess my feeling with this is that, if I was 12 or 13 and hadn't seen anything more than, I don't know, like Conquest of the Empire or those Milton Bradley games, I would probably try very hard to make this work better. I would enjoy I would enjoy the two games. Strategos, I still think is kind of an interesting game. I don't know if I'll ever have the willpower to try it again with someone. Imperial Governors, it really needs some fixing work to be a little bit better. But a little bit of house rolling or some beer might make it a lot of fun, at least. It's never going to be historical. Neither one is really an attempt to be terribly historical. But in some weird sort of ways, they create a historical truth that other designs don't necessarily manage as well. So that's kind of appealing to me. Even if more Strategos than the Imperial Governors. The Imperial Governors just, maybe with some fixes, it would start feeling more along that way. The silliness about, we just keep chasing in a circle because we're both at the limit of our economy, and, eventually one of us will draw a bonus card, and if it's the guy who's in the lead, then at least he'll be able to smash the guy who's below him a little bit more. I don't know. Yeah, but if I was like 13 or 14 or whatever, didn't have a lot of games, picked this up, I think I'd be kind of excited about it. I think I'd try to make it work a little better. By the time I got this, I think I picked it up at a con, which means I'm probably in college by this point, although not necessarily, but probably. It's the first time I went to cons that were big enough to have a number of dealers there. I think what happened was a dealer was trying to get rid of it last day of the con or whatever, and had it marked down, I don't know to what, $2, $5, whatever. Certainly no more than 5, probably more like 2 or 3. And, I picked it up saying, well, I got no idea. I don't know the company. Ariel's somewhat known. I think they put out Kingmaker, for example. Maybe I'm mistaken. But they put out something. They put out something known, and they put out a number of games, but they weren't well known in America. So that's, so I felt like I was taking a chance, and I certainly was. I didn't get a lot of play out of any of this, because by the time I got it, I had other things. I already had Imperium Romanum to play, This maybe excited me in the sense of, well, this maybe I'll be a little bit lighter and not make some of the mistakes that Imperium Romanum does. And it doesn't, but it makes other mistakes instead. And I had nothing on the Peloponnesian War yet. It wasn't until very recently that I picked up Mark Herman's Peloponnesian War, and I did a video on that. And then Pericles and the Clash of Arms one, because that was a big hole. And I feel like that's kind of a hard war to represent, actually. But anyway, at this point, I wouldn't go hunting for this game. If I saw it at, like, Goodwill and didn't have a copy, I'd pay a couple bucks for it, probably, because I'm a sucker for buying things that are cheap. I think there's something worthwhile in here. I think you can get a couple of good plays out of the two games that are in here. But it really isn't, Every now and then there's rare games that are really worth having. But most of these kind of off games, there's something else that did better anyway. Some of that may be a bit of snobbishness, though, in the sense that, that you get used to certain styles and flavors of games, and the SPI games definitely influenced me a lot, and Avalon Hill did. And certainly at an early age, when I was first looking at this, I was kind of like, well, this just doesn't compare, quality-wise. But, and component quality comes into play there. The components are shit. They really are. The maps aren't too bad. They're ugly, but they're sturdy. The cards aren't bad. Okay, the counters are shit. That's the big one. And they're glossy, super glossy, and super thin, and just really, really horrible. And you can't do anything about the side-mounted spurs on them. Anyway, it was neat to give this. This was probably the most intense try that I gave to this. I know that I played it around with it a little bit, but I don't think I made any really serious attempt. In fact, the only time I may have made a serious attempt, another attempt on it, may have been when I did my walkthrough history. And I said, well, geez, I've had this game all this time. Let's try the Imperial Governors, because it looked kind of goofy to me always. And yeah, it is kind of goofy, but it could be fun. It could be fun in a group. I just didn't have the willpower to keep going on it. All right, that's it. Send it up.